of a Snuggie?
Snuggie.
Snuggie. Why not wear a coat?
Well, if a coat is what is a Snuggie but a coat put on backwards? I think, right?
Yeah. I think Seneca said that.
Yeah, I think so too. It is. I mean, did the concept of coziness was that in the vernacular
Oh,
in the 18th century?
certainly. I think we all strive to come out of the wilderness to enter into a state of nature for greater comfort. So in every age, you find devices specifically designed for comfort, or as you say, coziness. But perhaps it is an example of the opulence reached by this new American experiment, that we have gone so far to pursue the excesses of coziness that we've abandoned pragmatism and utility for the extreme of coziness. To me, it is the example of opulence gone too far, I think.
I would argue that a Snuggie, at some level, has more utility than a blanket, in that you can still access your bowl of chips while underneath it.
That is that is very well argued. And I wonder why they would not say that within the ads. I will
Yeah,
posit this.
you can eat.
You've sold me. Such hypothesis requires experimentation. I would challenge any listening to this to kindly supply and send one, and perhaps we might test the experiment at a later date. Uh, to gauge the differences, and the experiment could be thus: one instance where one is covered by a blanket, to find the methods whereby one might eat comfortably, sit comfortably, what the benefits are, and then we shall try the same experiment with this Snuggie. And from this, we may gauge and judge and make true scientific decision as to whether the utility of the Snuggie exceeds that of the blanket and thus justifies the luxury and opulence of the device.
Listen, doctor, I think you might have a new treaty to write after we
I
finish
think we
this.
have a new experiment to gauge that the world could benefit from. The world needs to know the benefits of the Snuggie or the dangers of the Snuggie.
Yes, I agree. Well, for everyone watching, welcome to this primary source live stream. I am Isaac Loftus, the co-host of the wonderful podcast Too Complicated for History, and I am sick, as you may be able to hear through my microphone. However, we are pushing through, just like my guest today, the good doctor, Dr. Brent Franklin, did during his negotiations with France. He pushed through the gout. He pushed through all sorts of ailments. He pushed through John Adams and John Chase uh, inability to believe in his methodologies. Thank you so much for being with me, Dr.
That's
Franklin.
that's quite the epitaph. Ben Franklin snatched lightning from the heavens and pushed through John Adams.
Well, it,
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here and be in good company with you all to talk about this wonderful series and this wonderful time that we have shared.
yeah,
And of course, very pleased to be in your good company. So to speak of important things like science and philosophy
and Snuggies.
and Snuggies.
But so we're here to talk about episode 8, which is the finale, the last one of Apple TV Plus's Franklin, starring Michael Douglas. Before we get into it, how do you feel? What was your emotional experience seeing the story, the fictional representation of this portion of your life come to an end?
I I think I'm left wanting uh, by it. In truth, there 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 were so many pieces scattered about where I think something truly wondrous could have been constructed. And I think in the end, what can be said of the Franklin series, where it left its mark, was it engaged in the things to excite an audience without truly moving to the depth and true measure of what the story could have been about. I'm left wanting by certain qualities, and I know not if it was because they tried to do too much, with too many. There were so many characters, so many stories, so many different themes they were trying to explore that in the end I was left not invested enough in my own story. And I like my story quite a lot. And I know not if that was deliberate. I know not if that truly mattered. It was left so wholly open ended, left in many respects how it began on a ship in fairer weather than the beginning, but left with a character that we had seen throughout, Jacques, and his story taking a turn that was unexpected for the audience, that left with the infinite possibility of you are an American, you can do anything. But what does it mean for a Franklin returning home, returning home to a family he had not seen for years? Because it makes no mention of it in the series, but I have other children. My daughter Sarah. I have grandchildren I have yet to meet. But more than that, I have a helpmate who, despite diversions in Paris, I'm still mourning. I'm still returning to. I'm descending back into a life where I'm almost leaving the fame behind to end my years simply as an old man, a sage old man. But what does that mean? And we don't see that reluctance. We see that reluctance somewhat with my proposal to Madame Helvetius. But what is missing from it for myself is the true and tragic celebration of a pivotal and bloody chapter coming to a close. We're lost in negotiation. We're lost in tying things together. And what is missing, I think, is the passing of the baton and even the reluctant passing of the baton. They overlooked a remarkable opportunity for what that means and instead tried to reconcile things with John Adams.
They
But I
did.
think that I was left wanting.
Hmm. Yeah, I thought I had a similar feeling that reconciliation being relatively quick and sudden, and I'm not sure necessarily earned in terms of setup in the previous episodes. John realizing the limitations of his own approach felt like it could have been the central story of a much larger part of this, and the different tactics of how people like John Jay approached negotiating and getting what they wanted because they all wanted the same thing, and John's the moment when John tears up the letter and doesn't believe sort of the propaganda that has been the lies that have been fed to him is dramatic, but that exploration is it's interesting that you say that we got bogged down in negotiation, and I almost wish that that had been the focus of more of the show previously so that we could celebrate or explore and live in this moment in a more comprehensive way now
And we
at this
spoke
point.
about that. We spoke about that several installments ago, did we not? That it almost seems there was a reluctance to get too heavy into the negotiations, but the negotiations still needed to be honored. And so what instead took place was a very odd thing where we saw the conflict and tension of negotiation without the detail and focus enough to justify it,
Right.
which I know for myself watching it left me somewhat confused, left me somewhat underwhelmed.
And for someone
And
like you who knows all the details that actually took place, there were probably numerous. There was a lot that there was opportunity to go into.
hmm, and so it felt like many stories happening at once without the interweaving of them to tie it
Hmm.
all together. We have negotiations, but then we still have a temple sending delivering letters in Versailles, where there's no connection between the two. And so, to my mind, outside of endeavoring to honor the history, it was wholly unnecessary.
Hmm.
Um, and there are so many things that I think could have been touched on. For instance, my other grandson, Ben, who came with us, was there with Temple, and eventually was sent to Geneva for his education. We're missing correspondences and tensions with Franklin's family back home, with what choices he is making, his deliberate desire to keep family close however he can.
Hmm.
When those assertions were being made regarding Temple, there was family back in America who insisted he be sent back, that it was dangerous for him to remain. And we don't see the deliberate decisiveness from Franklin to, in many regards, give in to his own selfishness, because perhaps it would have been better for Temple to be returned. But Franklin says it, and he says it in the series to some extent, that being an old man, there is comfort in having your legacy right next to you. That
Right.
is true. That's represented in the series, but the way in which it's represented is I think there are better methods that could have been utilized in delivering the representation of that story.
Sure. Actually, so this is something that I haven't wanted to ask you for risk of spoiling the series. What actually happened to Temple? Well,
Temple
what? Yeah, what was the for our
Temple Temple
viewers?
Temple remains in Europe, and
Okay.
in fact spends his days in England, eventually reunites with his father,
Hmm.
marries a longtime friend and compatriot, and lives out his days, ironically, how I intended to. Both his father and he
Hmm.
live out the remainder of his days in England, upholding the the promise that they made to themselves, and Temple doing what I aspired to do prior to the revolution. Um, that is not the case for myself,
Hmm.
and I think I will say several years after returning from France, I will say shortly before my death, that I believe my end should have come far sooner, but I'm pleased that it didn't, so that I could bear a part in certain events that unfolded. In that instance, I'm referring, of course, to the Constitutional Convention.
Sure.
But the health problems we begin to see in the Franklin series, they don't abate. They only exacerbate. They only continue to worsen. My health only continues to decline. And so, despite bearing a part in various events that will transpire in the future, it could be argued by a capable historian that my time in France is the last time that Benjamin Franklin will truly live.
Hmm.
The remainder of my days are spent under the shade of a mulberry tree outside of my house, rendering what advice that I can to people who wish it. The last major political transaction that I undertake, of course, being the Constitutional Convention, and no one listens to me at that convention. No one. They'll listen to pithy wisdom, but as far as political suggestion, very little of my suggestions will find their way into the work itself. But I think it's a curious thing. And I think that there would have been a wonderful opportunity within that particular story of Mr. Douglas's Franklin to find the tension points betwixt the two,
Hmm.
of Franklin knowing to remain in France is to live, to return to America is to die. But coupled with that choice is the full knowledge that America's story is only beginning, that a
Hmm.
new beginning is transpiring, that a new transaction is opened, that new negotiations will need take place, that the republic must be kept. And there is a wonderful opportunity for an old man recognizing he is in a young man's revolution and wishing to place a single footnote at the introduction.
Hmm. That's well said. Excuse me. Um, I think it's the the depth and thoughtfulness that you just conveyed. I don't think is in this Apple series. I do think what this Apple series did, what the show did, and what it accomplished was give broad strokes as to the tentpole moments that happened. So
Hmm.
a larger public is now aware of some of the big moments, some of the broader dynamics taking place. Adams and Franklin being at odds with each other became a very large part of this. Um, uh, Temple and Franklin being sort of there being some tension between them, and a life that he was going to go live a life that you did not necessarily want him to go down, or he was going to pursue a path that you didn't necessarily want him to go down, became like a central focus. So I do think that there are at our goal for all the content that we produce is genuinely to spur curiosity. And I hope that those broad strokes that the show covered spurred some curiosity. And I hope the viewers who are watching these reactions and have gotten a chance to see your take on it got a sense of that depth that's beyond the series.
Hmm.
And that there are more things, there's more knowledge, there's more understanding to be had. Would you
Yeah. Well,
recommend potentially, if people wanted to pursue some more insight, some books? There's obviously the book that the show is based on, but if there are others that might provide some of that.
yes, I think several that I keep close to me at all times. There is, of course, a great improvisation. Um,
That's the one that
a
the show is
remarkable
based on.
remarkable book, a book that says within its introduction that Franklin left a wonderful opportunity behind because his autobiography, my autobiography, uh, covers all the way to France and therein finds an end. And yet there are more letters and correspondences from his time in France than at any other chapter in his life. He left a gift for posterity. And so it is a remarkable book. Bless you.
Excuse me.
Another is Walter Isaacson's Ben Franklin biography, which is a wonderful read.
Hmm.
Um, there is, of course, my autobiography. I feel somewhat biased in the recommendation of that, but it paints a wonderful picture of who the man is at the start of the series, and it's a fairly short read. So one might discover who Ben Franklin is outside of the myth in his own words, and then pick the series up. And then another that I'm quite fond of that isn't solely upon my life is 1789 by David Anders, which discusses the history of England, America, and France remarkably well, all arriving to the historic year of 1789, which is
Hmm.
prolific for all three nations. And then there's the work of Andrea Wolfe, who writes Founding Gardeners, Founding Brothers, and Chasing Venus. These are fixed and focused much more on natural philosophy and the sciences, but all of which played a crucial role in my life and mentions many people who over my life I will have correspondence with.
Well, those are great. I mean, I think that's a pretty substantial reading list that we'll throw them in the description of the VOD once
I
we
will confess, sir, and I know not if it is because I waxed melancholic upon the end of things, but I have enjoyed this time that we've spent together very much, and I grieve, I think, the series coming to an end because it means now these opportunities to speak and equate myself with the modern world come to an end. I feel it has been an education that I very much needed in stepping back out into 2024.
Oh, it's funny you should say that. I was thinking a similar thing, um, in that I do enjoy hearing your perspective on all of this, and enjoy these Monday conversations. I'm curious if your curiosity might extend to some interacting with some things like the Snuggie, potentially. Um, uh, Beyond that, like we can keep these conversations going, but extend the purview beyond the range of the show.
Well, I will say I would be very eager to continue my education, to discover modern contrivances, modern wisdom, and where wanted or needed, render my opinion upon it. I should be very pleased to do that.
I think there might be an opportunity for us to do some of that in the future. So I think that is not a bad idea at all. I'm just going to answer for both of us, myself and producer Pat, who is listening in and probably sweating in terms of us committing to for him making more content. But I think that is a great idea and something that we should definitely do. So you heard it here first. We are going to try to continue these conversations. Let's lock it in for the same time every week. We can start off our Mondays with our guests and our viewers in a intellectually stimulating way, and bring some. I know you've developed quite a junto over at Let's Be Frank, but maybe we can extend some live interaction to said junto and see if we can find some fun stuff for the doctor to share his opinion on and experience and view. I can think of some food innovations that might be interesting for us to do some live reactions to as well.
Capital, purely capital.
That sounds wonderful. Well, I hope everyone watching enjoyed the Franklin series. I know we're doing this reaction a little time after the finale ended, but so if you wanted to go refresh yourself and see what the series, if you haven't gotten a chance to check it out, go check it out, and then watch all 8 episodes of the Doctor and I discussing and reacting to the show as a show, the history, and how accurate it was, and whether that mattered to the Doctor's life. And I keep gesturing up rather than over. But
Well, I think dependent upon where the true Ben Franklin is, up might be completely appropriate.
or
might
down.
also be down. We truly don't know, but at present, you can equally point in front of you.
Yeah. So, also wanted to thank so much all of our viewers over these past 8 episodes, and also thank our supporters on Patreon, without these conversations would not be possible. They are the reason Primary Source Media is able to do everything. So please, if you get a chance to check out our Patreon and all the fun content that we are providing exclusively to our patrons, early access to stuff, more behind the scenes, and even some book giveaways to random folks based on some of the historians that we speak to. Not necessarily Dr. Franklin's book. Don't worry, you won't be getting a large autobiography, but maybe we do require them to be signed, Doctor. So if you might be so inclined. But thank you so much. And if you wanted to go check that out, go to patreon.com/primarysourcemedia. And if you would like to go to get more of the Doctor, please subscribe to his podcast, Let's Be Frank, which is just legitimately phenomenal and a really, really interesting exploration of his life that he has been doing over on that show. And it's available wherever you get your podcasts, but video versions of the show premiere on this very YouTube channel. One you will actually be able to see right after this, I believe. And anything you want to say about Let's Be Frank, Doctor? I know your new season is about to finish.
We've just concluded our 3rd season. At present, my Patreon junto is voting upon our 4th season, and I shall at present be engaging myself to revolutionize seasons 1 and 2 to bring them live to a video platform that will be put exclusively on this YouTube channel. So I have a considerable amount of work ahead of me and a considerable amount of content coming in the future.
Wonderful. That sounds great. I'm looking forward to speaking to you again next week, Doctor.
Good day, my friends.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.